maybe we should address the sort of industry standard today.
Yeah, so I think with intents and in particular with bridges, I feel like Across was definitely one of the first movers. So they got really popular, did a bunch of volume, added more solvers, and today like any new bridge that comes to the market adopts that model, right? Like I feel like that's the thing with crypto. Anything that gets popular, suddenly every project starts adopting that design. And even with Wormhole today, we're seeing a bridge like Mayan now doing multiple different models, right? And one of them is Intents. And LeFi is an aggregator, so we're seeing Mayan pop up at the top of the charts pretty often now, which is super exciting. So it's pretty exciting that now you have an intent-based bridge on top of Wormhole, right? So I want to know how you guys are kind of supporting Mayan, because I know that's a very important part of like ecosystem development in general. And moreover, like you also have a unique position because you're a messaging bridge, right? Like you're an interop protocol. So how are you combining those two approaches?
Yeah, nice, Arjun. That's a great overview as well, and definitely Hart and the team over at Across have really set the stage, I think, for everyone. And with you guys paying attention and, making sure that you aggregate those routes, that's fantastic. You've got players like Mayan that have come in to the fray. Ultimately, at the core of these, you have efficiencies that you need to be trying to optimize around your solver network. The way those solvers work right now is that they're market makers or liquidity providers that have to maintain liquidity across disparate chains and multiple pools so that they can fill these orders quickly. That's the standard model that we've got today. Mayan is one of these, Across is another. We came along and we wanted to be able to offer multiple routes because this is the direction we're going in terms of modularity and offering options to our users. I think it's a bit of a Cambrian explosion right now in terms of route options and, verification options, and we can chat about that later, which is, it's a very exciting time. Mayan to us was one of the strongest players in the space. We came along and we decided that we would engage with them really closely, make our bet there. So we have Mayan MCTP and Mayan Swift, which are their two current routes. We have them integrated into the Portal Bridge. And Mayan is also going to be distributing our own homegrown liquidity layer as well over at Wormhole, which is something we're excited about. And it's our novel composable intents architecture, which we are really excited to be rolling out in the coming week or two.
Awesome. Thanks for that explanation. And with intents, there's also like the entity layer on top, right? Like entity, which is Wormhole's token standard. That's a very important part of this composable intent stack because you can basically burn and mint an unlimited amount of tokens on the other side, right? So that's one of the limitations with the regular intent-based bridges, because like every solver kind of needs to have inventory of that asset, but when you are owning the supply of the asset with entity, it's a different ball game, right? Like I said, you can just mint the asset. So how do you guys feel like you're uniquely positioned here? Because personally, I feel like there's an edge here that you can, like over the next 6 months, actually outcompete a lot of the existing bridges in the market.
Nice one, Arjun. Yeah, I'd really love to get into that. So we have a couple of points here. We have the NTT framework, which we have developed. It's our burn and mint token standard. So as a new protocol today, you're going to have trouble bootstrapping your liquidity on the disparate chains, obviously. With our Intents protocol plus the NTT on top, you can launch your token and you can then bootstrap your own liquidity across multiple chains. What's interesting actually is that as a new chain, you can also bootstrap liquidity via this model as well. Our NTT framework is fully compatible. It's built to the same standard as Circle CCTP. So as a new chain, you can come along, you can launch your own flavor of USDC, call it USDCE, for example. In the case of Phantom as an example of this, they launched USDCE with NTT on their chain, and then they're able to bootstrap liquidity until they then ask Circle to take custody of those core contracts. So as a new chain, you can bootstrap stablecoin liquidity, which is key for bringing in users. As a protocol, you can bootstrap liquidity across your disparate chains. And what's unique and specific about our composable intents layer, which sits below the Mayan MCTP and the MCTP route, is our unique hub and spoke model. So our hub and spoke model means that we don't have solvers concentrate their liquidity across disparate chains. This is sort of significant for a few reasons. If you're a small protocol and you want to, entice a solver to allow for intent-based, fast pre-finality fills on different chains, you're going to find trouble getting those solvers to actually, want to pay attention without providing them with a ton of liquidity. So what we architected was a hub and spoke model where we have an auction program on Solana. We use Solana as the hub, actually. It's the power of Solana, little tiny, tiny shill at Devcon. So we use Solana's fast finality, and we allow solvers to actually concentrate all of their liquidity in an English auction mechanism, which runs about 400 millisecond auctions or so. So you've got maybe half a dozen solvers there, complex large ones and small ones as well. And they'll run an English auction. They'll get, let's say you want to go from ETH mainnet to OP. You'll get an instant wormhole message, like, it's a pre-finality, takes about 1 second, hits Solana, English auction, and then the USDC is actually then bridged from Solana. So the solvers don't need to actually control liquidity on separate chains. They just manage one liquidity pool of USDC, which we use as the messaging layer, and we use Mayan if teams want a swap layer in there as well. What this means is that if you take in the worst case scenario for finality in these routes, which is say 15, 16 minutes on ETH mainnet, a small protocol can provide a solver with about 21,000 USD of liquidity and do about $2 million in volume cross-chain per day. And that's going to be enticing for the solver as well. So this is our sort of model here. What it also means is that we can accommodate really large transfers with less slippage than the competitors. So there's these types of elements in there. It's going to be slower than across, that's for sure. Those guys, they're doing really well on speed. Yes, we want to become more competitive. But again, this is part of the wider narrative that we're actually seeing in the industry. We're actually all starting to row more in the same direction. And I would take, you mentioned token standards and frameworks, and people say, OFT, ITS, warp tokens, etc., and they talk about token standards today. Actually, they're all built to pretty much the same standard and the same specification. So those methods, they're kind of interoperable. There's just burn and mint authority on those tokens. So ultimately, we are pulling in the same direction. We've got complementary bits and pieces that we can actually help each other on. So I think we'll see more and more of this. I know, as you saw yesterday, it's like, we're pulling in the same direction. And I think as a rising tide is actually going to help all boats rise in this case.
Yeah, I think, so you mentioned that you're slower than across, but I feel like there are a few key important benefits that you guys unlock. So like you mentioned, the 21,000 US dollar the capacity for the solvers, right? So I feel like that's reducing the capital burden on the solvers, which will eventually make them more profitable. And it's actually over the long term beneficial because solver margins are going down. So I feel like that's a very key benefit, and it's going to be an advantage in the long term. So the speeds will come down. As competition increases, the speed will come down. The last one that I want to touch on is kind of the different verification models that we have with Entity, right? So of course, Wormhole has invested a lot in the Wormhole Guardian set, but then there's a trend in the ecosystem where people are adding customizable verification methods, right? And Wormhole's Entity framework does allow that. So I want to know, what are you excited about in that specific niche? And will we see ZK play a role at some point?
Super exciting space. I'm personally very excited about this space. I think the future is modular in terms of interoperability, and it's about making sense of the spaghetti out there. With ZK, it's again like a plethora, like a total explosion of verification mechanisms. You've got, your ZK VMs, you've got RISC-V, you've got formal verification methods, you've got everything, every type of flavor. You've got threshold verification, you've got stuff that's cheaper, you've got stuff that's faster, you've got stuff that's more secure. So really, you have this explosion of verification mechanisms, and it's one thing to say, hey, build it and they will come and all that type of thing, but the other one is how can we be just slightly opinionated and actually end up being a, semi-benevolent kind of guide in terms of I think what's going to become really important is basically like education and transparency around these things. Let's look at, uptime. Let's look at volume. Let's look at latency, security models, actually educating the people about the difference between a Schnorr signature and a ZK snark. Ultimately, devs and protocols, they're going to need to know this stuff, and it's going to be great. What it's also going to mean is scale. So if you look at this in terms of scale, you think about which chains might be using, RISC-0 ZKVM, how are they going to generate those proofs, and then how are they going to be able to post to a network like Wormhole, for example. How is that going to work? What is the future role of the Guardians play? Well, the Guardians are actually a tried, true, and trusted verification mechanism. And you look at Wormhole itself, and it's almost like a distribution platform in that sense. So you can have integrators coming in and trying out new verification mechanisms in tandem and threshold setups with the Wormhole Guardian set to try these things out and be able to take advantage of them. So I think the future is really, really bright and modular for sure.
I mean, I am personally of the opinion that modular stack is important, but a strong base, like the strong default, is even more important, right? So I love the fact that Wormhole is investing in like making the Wormhole Guardian network more secure, adding more respected entities, and just like also keeping the stack open enough that in the future, whenever there's like development in terms of like ZK or any new verification for that matter, you can always like add it on top, right?
Yeah, that's the future that we're all looking forward to.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for your thoughts, and thanks for like red pilling us on Wormhole today.
Thanks, Arjun, and check out Li-Fi too.